Hello and welcome back for another episode of the season of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, and it's Labor Day weekend. I hope for those of you that are in the United States, at least, are having a great 3-day weekend if you are able to get the 3 days off. We decided to get into a new sport this last week. Since Hood to Coast, we've just been recovering, and I'll probably be starting to get into some training next week. I also have some big news. I did decide to sign up for the La Quinta Palm Springs 70.3 Ironman. It will be on December 5th at the end of the year. And I'm very excited for that. I'm excited to get back into some training and have something to kind of keep me motivated. And we'll see where it goes. So that's a fun announcement. We also decided to get into mountain biking. So that's something that we've been doing this weekend. And that has been an adventure in and of itself. And I'll have to do, I think, a podcast on that at one point, because I'm thinking, this is only the first weekend that I've really ever done it. But I'm thinking that it's going to be some really great cross training. And I think any way that we can improve or just use different ways of doing things, you end up building different skills, but also just different ways of building muscle and strength. And that's always a good thing because it can be used in different ways. It's a heck of a lot of climbing. So I think that's going to be a really big benefit especially for my hilly courses. Awesome. So today, what we're going to talk about is I'm actually going to split this episode into 2 parts. So we have a 2-part episode. We're going to talk about supplements today. This week, supplements will be all about performance and inflammation. And then next week, we'll be covering more general health, but also very critical supplements and ones for performance, like iron, calcium, probiotics, antioxidants, to name a few. We'll talk about why they're essential, but also where some people and athletes can go wrong when taking too many of those certain types of supplements. And so that's what we'll cover next week. So stay tuned for that. For today, though, we're going to talk about some supplements that are pretty critical for performance and then also for managing inflammation. I get a lot of questions about supplements. I get a lot of questions over like social media. Also, patients come in and they want multivitamins and they want all these different things. And I sort of caution in some ways because, you can get a lot of this through food. And I think we have a tendency right now to want to supplement instead of eat real food. And that's unfortunate because eating real food is critical. First off, you need it for energy. You need it for filling in all of the gaps of what you eat. And I think we have worked ourselves a little bit into being able to eat less, but then fill in some of the gaps with supplements. And that really does not do well and bode well for long-term performance and also health. Supplements, yes, are cool, and they do fill in some of those pretty critical gaps, but I think we need to look at them a little bit differently. And I'm hoping that through the course of this podcast episode today and next week, we're going to I'm going to hopefully help change your mind a little bit about how you look at taking supplements. So let's see, I'm trying to make sure I didn't forget anything on that, but I think that's it. And I'll maybe make some corrections as I go, but let's jump into supplements for performance. So one of the first ones that I get a question about is whey protein. Do I need to take it? How do I take it? When do I take it? And, I remembered what I was going to say. I did also on Wisp Sports a whole season called Sound Bites. Some of them weren't quite sound bites. Some of them got a little bit long. But if you go back to season 2, if you go to wispsports.com and you go to season 2 of Sound Bites, you'll see all of the episodes that I did, and they are all on different types of vitamins and minerals because I pretty much broke down nutrient deficiencies as a whole. So it's something that I'm really passionate about helping athletes out with because it's a very common problem and it does cause a lot of issues with people athletes being taken out of training and also out of competing because of illness, because of injuries, and then also just overall general health. I want to see athletes be able to compete for long term and not necessarily need to retire early because things went wrong. So that's why I harp on this quite a bit. And I just want to continue spreading the word about it because it is pretty critical when we look at how the body functions. And you're going to see that sprinkled throughout today's episode and then next week's as well. So if you want to go and learn more about different types of vitamins and minerals and why we need them, I broke a lot of them down in those soundbite episodes, and they should be around 20. They should be sound bites. They should be around 20 to 30 minutes long. Some of them got a little bit longer than that, but the rest of them are pretty short-ish, and they would be perfect for like your commute or something like that. So that's what I wanted to remember. So let's jump in today. So whey performance, whey protein, we're talking about this under the category of performance. So whey protein is a pretty great protein source, especially when it comes to recovery. So let's break this down to under why you would maybe want to consume whey protein, which is two sections, right? So we have recovery, and then we also have daily protein requirements. So one of the issues that is very common with athletes is that, and probably people in general, but more athletes, because usually for just your general person, you're looking at daily requirements of protein being around 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. Yeah, that's right. Usually I say something different because I'm working with athletes. Okay, so 1 gram or less of protein per kilogram of body weight. So that works out actually to more like 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is a 1-to-1. Yeah, that's right. So you'd be probably looking at if you weighed 140 pounds, you'd probably be looking at wanting to get somewhere around 70-ish to 80 grams of protein per day. If you're just kind of a general person, you could get a little bit more than that. You could get a little bit more around that, and that would probably be fine. But for your athletes, though, this is where this starts to get pretty critical because it's very common for athletes to do two scenarios. Either one, not get enough protein, or number two, get way too much protein. And one of the problems is that if there's too much protein, it can cause an inflammatory issue. And it can be just another, like if you were to look at an athlete across the board and they're like, well, my performance started to drop. I started having all of these different types of issues. I also had a lot of stress because we were doing XYZ, and you put all these pieces together. I changed a bunch of coaches. There's so many different things that go into making this athlete and also putting them in the position that they're in now. One of the things is that when athletes over supplement, or when they take in too much of something, especially like protein, for example, it can be just one more of those contributors to why they're experiencing what they are, which is, that decline in performance and all of those pieces. So what is the best thing to keep in mind, and the best thing to keep in mind is that if you are training for anything, or if you are just an active person in general, aiming for about 1.5 grams to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day is about accurate. It works out to about 1-to-1 as far as protein to pounds. So if you're 140 pounds, you probably want to get 140 grams of protein. I should also say you might want to get a pen and paper out for today because I'm going to be talking about a lot of really great things, and you might want to take notes if you can, or you can come back and you can listen to this later. But anyway, so as far as your protein requirements, anywhere between 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is really about what you want to be doing. And you can definitely, even if you aren't sure if that's too much for you to be doing, really, if you stuck around that 1.5 to 2 grams and you got somewhere around there daily, that's probably plenty, and you won't necessarily be overdoing it. The problem is when people say, well, I was just consuming so much whey protein. I was having it for breakfast. I was having it before and during my workouts. I was having it after, and I was doing it during my snacks, and they're just like consuming so much of it that can become an issue as far as inflammation goes. But when it's used properly, though, it can be really helpful. So, for example, we've talked about this before, especially in the terms of recovery. Whey protein is a really great way to try to get more leucine into the body, which, especially for female athletes, can help to stimulate and trigger the recovery process, which is awesome. Usually you want to try to aim for around 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of finishing your workout. And yes, that's important. If you've seen other studies and other people on social media saying that the timing doesn't matter, it's actually quite critical, because it's this particular process within 30 minutes of working out that helps to trigger that recovery process. And then it also helps to keep you in that fat burning state for a little bit longer, especially for women. Okay. This is pretty critical for women, female athletes. So just keep that in mind. Whey protein can be great. Now, if you can't do whey protein because you're sensitive to dairy, or whey just doesn't agree with you, then you can use, or if you are vegetarian or vegan, you can use things like pea protein. You can use things like fermented branch chain amino acids, as well as sacha inchi. Those are all great sources of like a little bit extra sources of leucine that can be easy to get in. You can also eat things, I know this isn't for vegetarians or vegans, but if you don't like whey protein and you'd rather eat whole food, you can do things like eggs or chicken. All of those are great ways to get in a little bit more amino acids and protein, and particularly leucine. So that's whey protein. Also, I would say on whey protein, making sure that you're getting in a very, very, very good source of it is pretty critical. It's so common for me to see athletes or people consuming things like, I'll try to refrain from using brand names, but you go to the store and you get something that's like Costco, or you go to the supermarket and you get something that's already pre-mixed and it's a protein drink of some type. And it's just, you're basically just putting inflammation back in your body. Don't do it. Don't do it. Go and find a company. And yes, you're going to end up spending a little bit more money here, but go and find a company that makes sure that the whey protein that you're getting is from grass-fed cows. It's from very good sourcing. They do a very good job at processing it, and it doesn't have a bunch of fillers and stuff in it. This is so important. And I wish that people would understand that when you're going to put something like a supplement into your body, make sure that it's good quality, because again, this isn't really an issue necessarily when we're talking about food, but if you're putting something in that's going to try to fill in a gap, that's where this is quite critical. So make sure that it is very, very, very good quality. And again, grass-fed, I personally search out the New Zealand grass-fed whey protein. If you need suggestions, you can come find me on social media and I will give you some suggestions. But that's where I go, is I try to find a New Zealand grass-fed protein, because they just have better practices over there. And then their processing is usually a lot better as well, getting that from milk into that whey protein. It's just a byproduct of how they make some cheeses. So we started using it for things like protein supplements. So whey protein is pretty critical in many ways. It can be extremely helpful, but just making sure you're getting really good quality, and then you're not over consuming too much protein, but you're also not under consuming protein is pretty important. The next supplement we're going to cover is called beta alanine. This one, it shows up a lot in pre-workouts. It's the one that makes a lot of people get those tinglies that go up and down your body. If you've ever experienced that before, it's extremely uncomfortable. Those usually happen at a little bit of higher doses, and they usually go away once you start working out. But if you consume that pre-workout on your drive in and it's a little bit too high of a dosage, you may experience some of those tinglings. And yeah, it can feel like your skin is just crawling. It's the weirdest experience. But what beta alanine is it's an amino acid. It's usually found in things like protein. So chicken, meat, fish, those are usually where you'll find it. studies have actually shown that beta alanine really can help boost performance. Usually though, this is kind of more in your elite athletes. So you're training a lot and we're looking for that extra, 1 to 3% of improvement. But that doesn't mean that you can't use it and you can't see the benefits from it. The way that the beta alanine tends to work the best is that it helps to improve power and both that time to exhaustion when, those trials are trying to, you're going all out, right? Beta alanine can also help with delaying fatigue and can improve strength. So this doesn't just help your endurance athletes. It can also be very helpful for your CrossFitters, your weightlifters, pretty much across the board, any athlete that's looking to improve strength or delay fatigue, which is just about every athlete in every sport, that this can be pretty helpful. The way that it does it is it helps by improving muscle fiber firing rates and then also improves that recovery time. So every time, right, that you use a muscle, there's a rebound effect. So it's how long does it take for it to recover that you can then fire that muscle again. So that's how you delay fatigue over time, is by improving that process. And beta alanine can be one of those things that really helps with that. So one of the ways to get it in is through a pre-workout supplement. You might consider taking it in just a separate container and then adding it to a pre-workout or some type of whatever you usually use, branched-chain amino acids. What you can do is then dose it out so it's not quite so strong. And you can have like a source of it earlier in the day and then have a little bit of it right before going into your workout, and it'll still be just as effective. But especially if you get those tinglies anytime you tend to get beta alanine into your system. The other thing to do is just try to consume it quickly right before you start your workout and immediately get into training, and that may mitigate some of that tingling that you experience. But not everybody gets that. So one thing just to keep in mind, it's been shown to be helpful for performance, but it's just whether you can tolerate it or not, which is my problem. So the next one I wanted to cover is magnesium. This one is, it's just so critical. It's an essential supplement. We're seeing most, not just athletes, deficient in magnesium. Although I would say on a lot of my panels, when I run them, I see other vitamins and minerals more deficient than magnesium itself. But just overall, magnesium is used for so many things. It's one of the things that goes away the quickest when you're under stress, which for pretty much everybody right now, I would say we probably have higher needs of magnesium. Also, if you get sick or if you have an injury, magnesium is one of those things that's going to go the quickest. You need it for muscle and nerve function. It plays a pretty important role in maintaining healthy bones. Think about it, right? Your calcium, magnesium supplements that often come with vitamin D. Those are part of what helps you to absorb calcium well, and then also magnesium well, having calcium with it. However, you don't necessarily need to be taking a calcium magnesium supplement in order to have healthy bones. You can get magnesium through a lot of different types of foods. So then also it helps with healthy blood pressure, and magnesium can also be pretty critical for helping you maintain healthy blood sugar levels, which right now is really important since metabolic issues like insulin resistance and just having issues with managing your blood sugar because of eating quite a bit of sugary and fatty foods. Those are maintaining healthy blood sugar levels is pretty important. And for athletes, it's also fairly important. So it's easy to come to as I mentioned before, it's easy to become deficient if you're very active, and very active means moving all day long and potentially exercising 1+ hours a day. Keep in mind that maintaining a healthy magnesium level is critical for bone health, as I mentioned. It's also pretty important for maintaining muscle and also for preventing muscle loss in women post-menopause. It also is, that same thing goes for men as well, but for women, we are just always so much more sensitive, or we're always looking for osteoporosis in women because of the changes that happen as we go through with our hormones. So you see this more often being told to women to, make sure you maintain certain levels of all these things, because we want to make sure that you don't have the muscle wasting and bone loss that we usually see post-menopause. So making sure that you keep up with your magnesium is pretty critical. It's just, do you really need to get it in a supplement is one thing that I think is kind of difficult. I think you can probably get a decent amount of magnesium from food. And if you aren't sure, you can get tests that show you where your magnesium levels are. And if you set a baseline and then you check that, maybe 6 months later, and then you check it again the next year, 6 months later, and you find that your magnesium levels are fine across the board of 3 tests at different times of the year, then I would probably suggest that whatever and however you eat is fine. So I really want to make sure that as I talk about all of these, I stress how important it is to just get testing done periodically, because honestly, your food should be able to fill in a lot of these gaps. And if you get testing done and you see where you're at, you can tune in your nutrition and make sure that your diet is really doing a good job for you by just knowing, and just instead of guessing, you can just make sure, right? Also, you can help to make sure that if you are training for something, that you're getting enough of what you need. And that's how we delay or prevent issues, right? Okay, the next one is vitamin D. I'm probably going to start to be known as like the person that's constantly promoting vitamin D because it's just so important. And I've seen so many issues with it. If you've ever had your blood levels taken, you can, or if you've had them, especially if you've had them taken recently, you can see where your vitamin D levels are. The normal range is, what's a good word for it? Dumb. I don't know how else to put that. They put the normal range of vitamin D between 30 and 100. How is that even helpful? 30 and 100. That is a huge gap. So most athletes that I check, they usually come back as what I would consider deficient in vitamin D. They have levels in the 30s or 40s. And maybe for your average person, that's maybe not like the 30 to 100 range is fine. But especially when we are applying it to athletes, I would suggest it's not. I would suggest that the optimal ranges for everyone is between 50 and 80. But for athletes in particular, we really want between 50 to 80 on your scale of how they measure vitamin D. What we don't want is over 80. I've only had one athlete so far that was in the hundreds, but for the most part, everyone else was in like the 30s or 40s or lower. And that's not good. Here's why. So it's critical for bone health, as I mentioned with magnesium. One of those things that you absolutely have to have. You get vitamin D from the sun mostly, but since a lot of us tend to spend a little bit more time indoors and not outside as much anymore, it's difficult for us to get enough vitamin D. And then we also have safe sun practices because too much sunlight can cause cancer. And so it's just sort of this like crazy, we end up covering up. And especially for people like me that are redheads with white skin, we just can't spend a whole ton of time in the sun because sunburns are a thing. And then that is the opposite of what we want. So supplements tend to be one of the ways to help mitigate this issue. It's also, I also will say that I live in the Pacific Northwest and I don't necessarily test a lot of other patients that are outside of the Pacific Northwest. In the Pacific Northwest of the United States, for those of you that are not in the United States, is a very rainy, dark place, especially over the winter. I don't sell it very well. It's gorgeous, but it's rainy and dark. And so people tend to spend a lot of time indoors, which means we don't see the sun very often. Although this summer has been quite great. But anyway, I digress. So for vitamin D, it's very critical for bone health. It's very easy to be deficient in vitamin D, depending on where you live. It's also helpful for building muscle mass, which helps with recovery. Building muscle mass in and of itself, vitamin D helps with that. That's also helpful for recovery, but vitamin D is also helpful for recovery. You do need vitamin D to help with that. And then also what's really interesting is it can help with maintaining that muscle mass that you build. So if you're working hard to do that, you might as well try to keep it, right? And then also one of the things that I found earlier last year when we started going into this very interesting pandemic that we're in, vitamin D was used to help with treating tuberculosis back in the day before we had modern medicine. And it does seem to have a very important role in helping to mitigate some of the it actually helps the cells fight viruses. So having very good vitamin D levels may help in many different ways and can be very helpful for your immune system too, which could explain why some people get sick, especially in the Pacific Northwest throughout the winter. As your vitamin D levels drop, it may be one of the reasons, of many reasons, but it could be one of the reasons why we see those dips with your immune system and then you end up getting sick. And again, to come back to full circle here for athletes, getting sick takes you out of training, right? So it's really not ideal. And we do want to try to keep athletes, especially whose livelihoods are on the line. We want to make sure that we keep you training for as long as possible and try to reduce those times where you're spending time not training. So the other thing that vitamin D can help with as well is with aerobic capacity. It can help with muscle growth, and it can also help with muscle power. So vitamin D is just one of those that is a pretty important role. You can, as I mentioned, you can over supplement with vitamin D. So if you're concerned, anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000 IUs per day is going to be fine. You're not going to end up over supplementing with that. And if you're really concerned, you can do it for a couple weeks and then take a week off and you'll be fine. And then go back to, taking it for a couple weeks and then take a week off. That you'll be fine with that. Just a quick side note before I move on to my next section, and then we'll finish up. Vitamin D actually is another supplement that can be very helpful for our elderly folks. This is just an additional fact for you. It's been shown in several studies to help prevent falls in the elderly. And I don't know why. I didn't really look that much further, but I learned this in chiropractic school. And then they didn't really know why it worked the way it did. And I don't know if it necessarily has something to do with balance or if it's just that it helps to maintain that bone structure. So you just have a more solid structure or footing. I have no idea, but preventing falls is really critical, especially for our elderly folks, because oftentimes falls can trigger a cascade of events that lead to death, and it can be a quick decline after that. Grandma breaks her hip and then they end up in the hospital and then things kind of decline after that. So vitamin D is one of those that as you age, you might want to make sure you continue taking. So stay with me because we will be back with more right after this. Okay, our next section is going to be on managing inflammation. So we also have talked about this quite a lot on the podcast in several episodes previously, so you could go back to those. But managing inflammation is like one of the key factors for athletes. Managing stress and inflammation. Those are like your critical pieces because training is an inflammatory process. And this is what I want you to think about, and this might help you in the future, or it could help you now. If you are, or if you're a coach and you have an athlete that's saying, I started taking antihistamines because my allergies started flaring up, or I started getting some niggles, like that's what my coach calls them, is niggles, which I think is great. But if you start getting some like muscle pain or joint pain, or if you start noticing that you're, getting, let's see, what's another a good example? You start noticing that you're getting some fatigue. These are all signs that you might be entering into a spot where your training and then your lifestyle is starting to add up. You're starting to see more stress on the system, which means there's an increase in inflammation. That's a very critical spot for an athlete, because what can happen, and oftentimes at the same time, you may start to notice that your performance is plateauing, or it may even start to decline. And this is a very, very critical point in an athlete's timeline, because if you continue to start overtraining at that time, so you bump up the training because you're not seeing the improvements that you want to be seeing, you're now adding an additional layer of stress and inflammation on the system. And then it's just going to continue downwards from there. So what we want to do is we want to catch the athlete at that time or beforehand, make sure we mitigate that inflammation and help them continue that performance and seeing those progressions upwards, right? So as I said, training and exercise in and of itself can be inflammatory and is inflammatory, because that's part of how we get adaptations to exercise. It's critical. And I want you to remember this section, because it actually has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about next week when we talk about antioxidants. So I'm leading you up to it. So make sure you don't miss that episode as well. But with inflammation, we don't necessarily want to cut it out completely, because it's part of how our muscles adapt and it's how we get stronger. So really what we want is to try to rest. We want to try to make sure that we're eating enough to help our body be able to manage well. But there are some things that we can do as far as looking a little bit more internally to see what's going on. I will say, because a good portion of the people who listen to this podcast are females, your period and your menstrual cycle can give us such a good look at what's going on in your body. Because many times when female athletes are having very inflamed periods, so like I'm talking about lots of cramping, they might break out a lot around their periods, as well as maybe have very, very, very heavy periods. They may get cramping throughout their cycle or spotting. That is a body that's very inflamed, especially during that increase of an inflammatory process when the period starts. So you actually have the opportunity. So many people look at it like we need to get rid of periods because they are just such a nuisance and they really impact your performance. However, they are not necessarily that way. That's actually not true. You can go back to previous episodes to learn more about that. But also, periods are such a great way to see how your body's doing. It's one of the ways that I know when my body is doing well and when it's not doing well, because those are just one of the ways that you can see when the inflammatory process and those inflammatory markers are just higher in the body. So how do we deal with that? Omegas and turmeric are the two that I'm going to cover today. There are many others and this is just, okay, let's take a step back here. This episode is just about supplements. There are a million other things that you probably need to be doing, like making sure that you're sleeping well, like making sure that you're recovering well, making sure that you're eating real food and making sure you're eating enough of it, and that you are taking time to decompress from work and making sure that your lifestyle is not nearly as stressful as it is, and yada, yada, yada. There's like so many other things that you can be doing to help outside of this, but this podcast episode is about supplements. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Managing inflammation. Omegas are probably one of your fatty acids. Omegas are probably your best bet for reducing inflammation because they work differently than, like, let's say NSAIDs, for example. NSAIDs or NSAIDs, I don't know. People call them all sorts of different things. You're like ibuprofens and acetaminophen. All of those have, they do help to stop what I would say is they dampen the inflammatory process. They don't actually stop it. When you get omegas at the right dosage, they can actually stop that inflammatory process, which is why going back to periods again, this is why a lot of period protocols to help manage those cramps and symptoms and PMS and all those things are usually omegas are included in that, because they can help to stop that pro-inflammatory cytokine from popping up. Okay. So omegas, fatty acids, you can actually get your fatty acids tested. You can do this now often during doing a blood spot test, which is pretty cool. So you don't necessarily have to go get your blood drawn. You can just get a kit and they'll test your organic fatty acids. And it's really neat. You'll get your omega-3s, your omega-6 levels, and there's a ratio there that you really want to pay attention to. But before we get to that, we're going to revamp how you've really learned about omegas for a minute. So most people have learned that omega-3s and omega-6s, omega-3s are your anti-inflammatories and your omega-6s are pro-inflammatories. So your omega-3s are anti-inflammatory for the most part, but they can also have a pro-inflammatory process to them as well. Your omega-6s are generally considered pro-inflammatory. However, you need them and they can have an anti-inflammatory effect as well. So what you really want is to make sure that your ratios between omega-3s to omega-6s is about a 4-to-1 ratio. You really want to make sure that you have presence of both. So we don't necessarily want to cut out both of them or either of just the omega-6s. We want to keep both in the diet. Where do you get them? Omega-3s usually come from things like fish oil. And there's different types of fish oils as well, but I'm not going to go into that today. But fish oil is where you get your omega-3s. Pretty critical to make sure that these are being filtered and that they're being tested for heavy metals, because that's a problem. So you can also eat fish and get omega-3s, but it's a little bit harder to eat enough fish sometimes in order to manage that inflammatory response. So having some fish oil as a supplement around is a good idea. And then your omega-6s are usually your refined oils, vegetable oils, but you can also get omega-6s from, they're mostly those. I mean, omega-6s they're mostly your seed oils, things like that. Omega-6s also come from meat. So any type of meat that comes from like saturated fat, or that has saturated fat, which is just about everything, ground beef, chicken, all that. So both, as I said, have anti-inflammatory pathways, but they both can have pro-inflammatory pathways. You can find this by looking at a ratio. So basically what you can do is you can get your fatty acids tested. Okay. And then what will happen is they'll have a ratio at the bottom, and it's your EPAs to AAs. So eicosapentaenoic acid to arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is what I was saying is on that omega-6 pathway, and arachidonic acid is what you get from eating meat. Your eicosapentaenoic acid comes from fish oil, and so it's that omega-3 side of things. So what you want is you don't want to stop eating meat. You don't want to stop necessarily lowering your omega-6s per se, unless it's really, really bad. But most of the time what I've seen, especially in like our NFL football players and in also our really elite endurance athletes, arachidonic acid can be really high because it's part of what can drive that inflammatory response. So what you want is to see that ratio that I was talking about that you can find at the bottom of those tests for EPA and AAs. You want to see them at 8% or higher, between 8 to 12%. And that will let you know what's going on with those inflammatory pathways. If you can get it to 8 to 12%, it will help to mitigate and regulate those inflammatory pathways. But most of the time, what I see are people in about the 3 to 4%, with arachidonic acid being quite high and your eicosapentaenoic acid being quite low. So that's what I would suggest as far as omegas go. It can really help to stop that inflammatory process. And this is one of the things that I check most often because it's pretty critical. And it's part of how I set a baseline for my athletes. The second and the last supplement that we're going to talk about today, you can see why I broke this into two. I could have broken this into three, I think, but the last one we're going to talk about today is turmeric. So another great way to help mitigate inflammatory pathways is turmeric. Turmeric is it is a yellow root. It's an adaptogen. It's the same as like ginger. They're root spices that are grown, and it's golden. It's like this orange root. It's really, really cool. It turns into a yellow powder, and it's curcumin that's inside of turmeric, which is the thing that's the most anti-inflammatory and the best thing for the body. But when you get it in a spice or from the root, curcumin is in a very, very, very low amount. And it's kind of hard to get absorbed into the body. They call it bioavailability. So usually what you'll see with your turmeric supplements is their curcumin. But then they also have something like pepper or piperine with them, because what it does is it helps to the body absorb that curcumin. So it's kind of weird. But anyway, turmeric is considered the golden spice because it has so many benefits. There was a book that I read that was called How Not to Die. It was in a vegetarian vegan course that I took for nutrition because it's critical to learn how to help everybody. But the book that I read was they were looking at a bunch of different studies and suggested that turmeric was part of the reason that we didn't see cancer in India before Western food and medicine started spreading its roots. Now we see higher cancer rates, but before that, we really didn't see it very often. And several studies have followed up on that. And one of it, I think, if I remember correctly, part of it was that turmeric may have the ability to help reduce or slow tumor growth. And so that's one of the reasons why, I mean, I'm not going to go there. We have rates of cancer in everybody. Technically, like your cells go through a process of killing themselves if something goes wrong, which is daily. It's just when that process gets out of hand is when we start seeing cancer. So that can be often due to stress. It can be due to genetics. It can be due to all sorts of things. It's just part of the deal. So anyway, the reason why I love curcumin though, and the reason is because when I was doing my master's for my human nutrition and functional medicine degree, what I found was I did my capstone on, it's just crazy that at the time, this is what I chose to do, but I chose to study turmeric and branched chain amino acids. And I wanted to see their effect on helping athletes as far as delayed onset muscle soreness. And what I found was that turmeric can actually help to mitigate the inflammatory response without slowing down those adaptations to exercise like antioxidants do. So remember when I said that what we want is to have that inflammatory process because it helps to help our muscles and our body adapt so that we get stronger, right? However, what happens a lot of the times with our antioxidants is they actually stop that process, and then that's not very helpful. So I want you to keep this scenario in mind because this is something that I see a lot. We need to understand why we're using supplements. Right now, a lot of people are being told because of the stuff that's going on in our world that we need to be high dosing vitamin C. We need to be high dosing all these different types of supplements and all things. Keep in mind that for an athlete, that's a really not good idea in the sense that if you are taking, let's say, for example, 4,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and you're also trying to perform and train for something, you're probably mitigating a lot. Like you're working out and you're training really hard, but you're not necessarily going to be getting the most out of that training. You actually might be kind of setting yourself back a little bit. So this is why it's really important to understand how to use supplements and why you're using them. If you need them because let's say you get sick, then that's a good scenario to use them. However, if you're putting that much of an antioxidant into the system and you're trying to get the benefits from exercise, you might be working against yourself a little bit. So that's one of the interesting things about turmeric is that it is an anti-inflammatory, but it doesn't necessarily mitigate that inflammatory response in the same way that vitamin C does. So you can still somewhat see those adaptations to exercise, which is really cool. It's one of my favorites to use, especially when I get like an inflamed GI tract panel back on an athlete and they're in the middle of training and I need to make sure that they see like those improvements still with their performance. I use usually things like turmeric or curcumin to help with that anti-inflammatory effect on their gut while still trying to make sure that they're able to perform well. And so that tends to work pretty well amongst some other things. So that is pretty much sums up both an inflammatory, a way to help manage the inflammation, but also to help use supplements to help with performance. I hope that you got a lot out of this podcast episode today. Next week, what we're going to talk about are some of those general health supplements that you may or may not be taking. And I want to give you some things to think about as far as probiotics and antioxidants and iron, ones that a lot of people take. And I want to talk about how to take them appropriately, but also you might give you some different things to think about when it comes to just taking supplements as a whole. We'll talk about multivitamins as well and my standpoint on those. But to wrap up and just to say, the theme of all of this is that it's best if you can get the most of this stuff through food. I talk about this all the time. Eat the rainbow, eat lots of food, whole foods, eat really good, solid, nutritious, dense food, because that's ultimately what's going to help set you up the best. It's going to keep you from, potentially being in energy deficit, which is not where we ever want an athlete to be. If you find yourself scouring the kitchen, it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon for food, you haven't eaten enough, so you need to start eating more. And oftentimes, if you're eating the rainbow and you're eating a really good plate of food, then, you're less likely to work yourself into deficiencies. So, try to choose foods that are nutrient dense and then go from there. You don't have to restrict your eating by any means. You don't have to restrict the foods that you eat. Just try to choose at most meals foods that are going to be colorful and have a lot of nutrients in them. And I bet you'll find that first off, you're going to feel better. Second, you'll find that nutrient deficiencies are probably not going to be as bad. And also your performance in your training will go up because you're eating really good food with enough calories and all of that jazz. So that's my spiel. That's my soapbox. That's our episode for now. I hope that you will stay tuned for next week because it's going to be another really great one packed with a lot of information for you. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. I would also really appreciate you leaving a review on your Apple Podcast app or anywhere that you listen to this episode. It really helps to get this out to more people. So please do that if you can. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find more at drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com, and you can always leave a direct message with us over on social media as well. We would love to hear from you. All right. Well, have a great week, and thank you for listening, and I will see you then. Take care.